Bonjour, I am Clara Chouinard, Project Manager, Education, Community Engagement, and Cultural Programs at the McCord Museum. On behalf of the museum team, I welcome you to this activity called Parachute, a Brand, an Exhibition, in conjunction with the exhibition Parachute, Subversive Fashion of the 80s. If the McCord Museum has an important dress, fashion, and textiles collection, the museum also has an important indigenous collection. The McCord Museum sits on land used and occupied by indigenous peoples for millennia that has never been ceded by treaty. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation has a profound and ongoing attachment to this territory, which it calls 𝗔𝗩𝗘𝗖. Acknowledging that colonialism has had devastating consequences on First Peoples, the McCord Museum recognizes its duty to raise awareness and support continued vitality of indigenous cultures. Pour cette édition de la mode au musée, nous sommes heureux d'accueillir aujourd'hui Nicola Pelly et Alexis Walker. Alexis Walker est conservatrice adjointe costume, mode et textile au Musée McCord. Elle a assuré le commissariat de l'exposition Parachute, mode subversive des années 80 et est l'auteur du livre qui accompagne cette exposition intitulé Parachute, design subversif et mode urbaine. Nicola Pelly est designer de mode et cofondatrice de la marque de vêtements Parachute, fondée à Montréal en 1977. Cette marque a connu une fulgurante ascension et est devenue un véritable phénomène international. L'exposition Parachute, mode subversive des années 80, réalisée par le Musée McCord est présentement à l'affiche et le fruit d'une étroite collaboration entre la commissaire Alexis Walker et la designer et cofondatrice de la marque Nicola Pelly. Lors de cet entretien, animé par Stéphane Leduc, journaliste de mode, enseignant à l'École supérieure de mode et commissaire associé de l'exposition, nous pourrons découvrir la complicité de ces deux femmes qui partageront avec nous le fascinant travail qu'elles ont réalisé dans les coulisses de cette exposition. L'activité dure 45 minutes en anglais et est suivie d'une période de questions de 15 minutes que vous pourrez poser en anglais ou en français via la plateforme Zoom ou encore la page Facebook du Musée McCord. Thank you, and I hope you will have a good time with our guest. Stéphane, I give you the floor.
Thank you, Clara. It's so exciting. I'm very happy to be here. Hello, everybody. And it's great to have the time to discuss all the aspects of this exhibition because it's a big exhibition for the museum and an important one for the fashion, the history of fashion. And Nicola, first, I was wondering, why was it so important for you to create an exhibition about the brand?
Well, as you probably remember, Stéphane, it was actually your idea that you gave me many, many years ago to start working on a retrospective. And you were very helpful and supportive over the years and helped me with the concept and finding locations and partners. So I'm very grateful to you for that. I thought the exhibit could be a nostalgic experience for Montrealers who had been around in the city in the 1980s and had felt the energy of the city. And also for those people who didn't know about Parachute, I thought they would learn from Harry's and my experiences creating the brand and developing it and opening our stores.
Also, one of the things that was very important for you right at the beginning is that it would be not only about the clothing, but about the spirit of the time. And why that? Why this?
Well, it was always essential to us that it wasn't simply an exhibit about fashion. Parachute was not only a fashion brand. We were more than a fashion brand. We wanted to focus on the period, the time, the era. We wanted to put the brand in the context of the 1980s and show and pay homage to the music, the architecture, the graphics. We wanted to highlight the photographers, the models, and basically, reflect what was going on in particularly Montreal, where we started in the 1980s.
What do you remember of that time in Montreal? Because you started as a designer. It was a new country for you when you came here in Montreal in the 70s. So what was the spirit of the time?
There was a great deal of creativity and energy and enthusiasm. I think socially it had been rather a depressed decade. And there were a lot of very creative people who were coming onto the scene, particularly in music at that time. So it was very exciting to be around then.
What did you have in mind? I think it's important for the people that haven't seen yet, and I hope they will see the exhibition. What did you have in mind when you created the brand, you and Harry?
We wanted to design, basically we wanted to design clothes that we would like to wear ourselves. We felt there was a market and we very quickly realized that we wanted to open our own stores, that we wanted to be able to reach our customers directly. Designing Harry as an architect and an urban planner was very interested in designing the stores. It was part of the brand image. So we basically, as I said, we wanted to create clothing that we would like to wear ourselves and that we would like to offer to our customers.
Alexis, you've done a lot of research for this exhibition, and I was wondering what surprised you the most when you started doing the research for the exhibit?
Well, I think I should explain the three avenues I took with the research for the exhibition. The first was a really intense object-based research. So Nicola had about 800 garments in her collection. And in the summer of 2019, her and I spent about 3 months here on site at the museum, working very closely with the clothing, studying them and styling outfits for inclusion in the exhibition. My second avenue for research was archival research. So Nicola had also saved a mountain of press, of photos, of sketches, business documents, ephemeral objects, and also videos. This was about a year-long process for me. I went through everything, reading everything, and that stuff, the archival stuff, a lot of it ended up in the show, but it also just served as enriching my knowledge on the subject. And then finally, oral history research. So in the case of Parachute, we're dealing with a contemporary fashion brand. So you still have lots of key players who are alive. I spent quite a bit of time hunting people down. I realized I have a talent for internet stalking that I didn't know about before, but it was a lot of fun. I met a lot of very cool and interesting people who were implicated in the history of the brand. So just to piggyback on what Nicola had said before about the concept that you guys established, because when you arrived here at the museum, I think you guys had identified all these kind of puzzle pieces or key themes in the history of Parachute. So, the importance of nightclubs, the celebrity factor, photography, the design process, and the stores. But I think my research maybe exposed some questions. And I think for any good exhibition, you need to really be answering a question. So that's it. I think I identified two main questions that came out of the research. So for the exhibition, the question that we're attempting to answer is, how did Nicola and Harry transform subcultural street fashion into an international and sophisticated designer fashion brand? A more in-depth question, and what really served as the foundation for the book, was, should Parachute even be considered an underground fashion brand in the first place? Because on one hand, you do have this connection to street culture, but on the other, if you're dressing Don Johnson on Miami Vice and making millions of dollars a year in sales, are you really underground? So really, I think my research facilitated the story that we told.
Did you feel that the people you were talking to were it was very precise, their memories about the brand?
I mean, memory is a funny thing, right? Like, I think in certain cases, and Stefan, you were with me when we went to Florida to interview Harry. I mean, his memory was unbelievable. I think even the videographer that we had hired commented on how amazing the story was that he was telling. But, in all of our museum work here, when you interview people, memory is a funny thing, and especially 40 years later. So I think there always has to be a balance between what people are telling you and then maybe double checking back into archival research, into the press and all of that.
Nicola, why did you keep all those archives? Because it takes space. It's not easy. It's 40 years. I'm surprised you kept so much, and it did help so much for this exhibition.
Well, I think originally we were moving on to other projects, but we did hope that maybe somebody would come along and say that as a licensee and would keep the brand going in some form. And we did negotiate with different partners, but nothing came of it. So we moved on. And I think also I was just a natural born hoarder. And so it just seemed right to me to hang on to everything. I don't think I ever thought it would be an exhibit. I didn't expect to do an exhibit until you made that suggestion. So that was really how it worked.
Do you think Harry had this sense of the importance of archives as well, being a teacher for so many years? Because we know people that study like to have references. I wonder if it's what it is.
I don't think any of it was planned. I mean, I think it was more, he didn't like throwing things away. And I think we just, because we had the space at the time, we just kept it. I don't think we really understood or planned what we were going to do with it. And it was just very fortunate that we had so much to make, in order to make use for this exhibit.
Alexis, I know that we will talk about all the aspects and all the people that are involved in the process of an exhibition, but I'd like to know if you were surprised or amazed by the impact of the brand.
Honestly, no. I think, again, I bring it back to the research. I think once you do a deep dive into Nicola's archive, it's just self-evident. The success of the brand is self-evident. Mm-hmm. The unique fashion product, the mountain of coverage in the press, editorial and otherwise, the striking promotional photography and image making. And once I started to research beyond the parachute archive to learn about society and culture of the 80s, so, postmodern design, celebrity culture, MTV and music videos, hip consumerism, the West's obsession with Japan during the decade, I think it's just obvious that parachute was so tapped into the zeitgeist of the era that there's no way it couldn't have been a success in my opinion.
Nicola, I know that you've seen many people, and I saw during some of the visit that some people were talking to you and remembering so many things. Were you surprised by those memories that are so vivid in the mind of people?
Yes. One of the most meaningful things for me of this whole experience was the impressions I'd get from former customers who could remember, when they bought the garments, when they wore them, where they bought them, what the period was in their lives and how important it was to them at that moment. And then the fact that they had kept the clothing, as a very symbolic part of their growing up or the stage they were in their lives. And this was very meaningful for me. And then the people we approached to be involved who were going to contribute, they were all so excited and enthusiastic, and they all had different stories, and it was altogether an amazing experience. So
it's always happy times and great memories for the people that I do receive some messages as well from because of Instagram, which helps a lot to be in touch with people. And it's amazing how they felt about that time and how great are the memories and so clear in their mind. Alexis, the conservation department is very important in the museum. And there's also one aspect that for a fashion exhibit are the mannequins and the way it's done and prepared. Could you tell us more about it? Because it's an expert.
I think before we get to that, I'd like to just piggyback in reference to some of these images here on what Nicola's saying, because we learned a lot from this oral history research. Claire, can we just go back one slide? We tracked down so many people, models, business partners, employees, or people who had just been part of the scene in Montreal and also in New York. And I think in this case, COVID helped. COVID didn't help us in a lot. Our exhibition was delayed a year, but because of that delay, I had an extra year to research, which was amazing. Also, I think with maybe everybody stuck at home and bored and or lonely, people were more than willing to talk to me at length about parachute. But also maybe that bears witness to, how fond their memories were for this time. So what did I learn? I mean, models helped us identify other models. Certain people had images that we actually didn't have in Nicola's archives. Here's two examples here of photographer Ellen Tannenbaum from New York and Andre Gagné from Toronto. And in these two cases, they had very early new wave photographs, which is something that was maybe lacking a bit in Nicola's archive. These were too late to get actual photos in the exhibition. We managed to incorporate them into videos and the microsite. And luckily, we did have time to get these wonderful photos in our book. The oral history research also revealed the depth of both the New York and the LA stories. think store employees really shed light on how important Morgan Allard was and how integral he was into the international explosion of the brand. The LA story also really emerged when speaking with John Shangoli, who was the West Coast director for Parachute. Press relating to LA was really good. I think a lot of it centered around party photos, like pictures of people at store events. But John really provided insight into how the LA stores operated a little bit differently than their New York counterparts. One of my favorite things I discovered about was this artist whose photos at left here, Stephen Arnold. He had a working relationship and friendship with John Shangoli and Parachute in LA, and he did a lot of this West Coast promotional photography. He was so much fun to learn about. And I would say if people don't know who Stephen Arnold is, go follow the Stephen Arnold Museum and Archive on Instagram, because it was really a very fun discovery for me. John also gave the museum photos, including several Stephen Arnold prints that we didn't have. And then finally meeting and chatting with several key people. So Ruben Toledo, Dick Walsh, and photographer Bobby Sheehan. They not only helped with my research, they really generously gave us amazing artworks and photographs, and each contributed a text to the Parachute book. If I did have to generalize, I would say that everybody I talked to was authentically cool and continues to be 40 years later. And I think this is a major factor in Parachute's success and why they had such compelling street credibility. I think Nicola and Harry were really, really smart to surround themselves with hip, young, talented, but also very driven people. And I think overall, as Nicola says, it was a really touching experience for me to be able to listen to people talk about their youth and this really wonderful time in their lives. And quite a few people even made a point of saying that their time with Parachute was amongst the best moments of their careers.
Yeah, all those people have been such creative minds and such talents. It's quite amazing. And it's great to have all those images either in the exhibit or in the book, because it's important to see the whole aspect and how a brand could be seen in the eyes of other people. That's also something wonderful, and mostly through pictures and drawings. That's wonderful. So let's talk now about this expertise that is quite special, because putting on clothing on a mannequin is not that easy. It needs a lot of work and expertise.
No. So yeah, I think we can start with maybe talking a bit about the mannequin process, the mounting process and the selection of our garments. So again, we're bringing it back to this object-based research that Nicola and I engaged in 2019. At first, honestly, I was completely overwhelmed when I saw the volume of clothes she had, and also that Parachute was separates, right? Like, this isn't a style of dress where silhouettes were dictated to people. It's up to you to build your own look. So I had no idea how to start this off. And I think what made sense at first was going back to the archive to look for images of garments that we had or things that could serve as a guide for making outfits. Some things worked really well. So for example, Nicola's sketch at left and our blue teddy bear coat here, the sketch totally informed the dressing of our mannequin, and it looks fantastic. There was a lot of failures though with this approach. And I speak of this series of photos on the right that were taken in the basement of the Soho store. I was able to identify in the archive similar garments or garments with similar colors and textures and build some outfits that way. But when we put these on a mannequin, it didn't look good. It was boring. And it made me realize here that what's so amazing about these photos is not only the clothes, but the dynamism of the human body in them. And once a body is taken out of Parachute clothes, it loses something. So in the end, we had to rethink this approach. And what we decided was Nicola and I were just going to hole up in an atelier here with a mannequin, a camera, and racks of clothes, and just start trying things on. So for the 65 ensembles that you see in the show, this represents about 275 outfits that we put together over the summer of 2019. Here's just some working photographs of our mannequin styling sessions. So Nicola, do you want to talk maybe a bit about some of the observations we made in this process?
Yes, certainly. Yes, so the biggest challenge, as Alexis has said, is that mannequins are basically static. And we wanted to try to recreate the sort of energy of the clothing as if they were being worn by people. We found a few, layering was important, especially if you could, the top garment you wore, the mannequin would have open, so you could show the layers. Putting hands in pockets seemed to relax the image a bit, and it became less static. groups of mannequins together, maybe facing different directions, as you can see in the second one, and the group on the far right, and also using colors as themes worked. The model with the jacket and the pants, the beige sort of outfit, Alexis was very keen on this, and I felt, yes, it was definitely parachute, but it wasn't the strongest of them. We had to eliminate so many mannequins, and we had to make sure we had enough men's mannequins. We had to make sure we covered all the different looks and eras of parachute. So in the end, we had to drop that one. I think Alexis was a little disappointed.
Yeah, well, you know what? I think that mannequin to me represents something really important as to why it was so important to have Nicola here. Because parachute's so interpretive, one of my worries with working in this way was that I was going to impose my own personal style on the entire parachute exhibition, and it would end up being, you know, Alexis's version of parachute, and that's not what we wanted. So this was an example where when Nicola said, it's good, but it's not iconic, I realized having her there as almost like a barometer and a guide was so important. And I think because of having her there, we were able to achieve what you could call as kind of like pure parachute throughout the exhibition, as opposed to me, the curator, my own personal style. But yes, yeah, I would still wear this outfit. I love it.
It's a great chance to have the designer, because very often exhibitions could be or might be about an old time, and we wouldn't have access to the designer, and the danger is to see it our own way, as you say, and to modernize the look to the actual time. One of the things that I found it very interesting also is the fact that since it's a non-gender unisex collection, Parachute was creating clothing for men and women as well. Some of the clothing have been put on, like one of the jumpsuits that I own is on a woman's mannequin. So it's interesting that you've been able to play with that as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, you know, the androgyny, there's both things that work in parachute, androgyny and unisex happening at the same time, but we'll come back to that in a bit. Hold that thought.
Yes,
I think, yes. Nicola, do you want to explain what's going on in this series of 4?
This series shows a little bit how Alexis and I worked and how hit and miss it was. And we might start with one set of outfits on the far left. We weren't completely happy with it, so we played around, we dropped the skirt, introduced the pants, had a different top, and that we felt wasn't working quite well. So we went to the next outfit, and that was still not quite right. So we ended up with the outfit of the mannequin on the far right, which we felt had the best of everything here. It also shows a little bit how Harry and I were trying to create a vocabulary for our customers. We wanted to give them a language they could, put clothing together themselves, and so that they would be expressing themselves, giving themselves confidence. And so these actual 4 slides shows a little bit how a customer might be trying clothes on in store until they ended up with the right combination.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it was like a big, giant fashion puzzle. And for me, it was very interesting in that this was fashion styling work. This wasn't typical curatorial practice. You know, usually when you work with, say, historical fashion or a designer like Dior, silhouettes are fixed and dictated, and there's not much wiggle room. Like maybe you can look at photos to help style a mannequin, but you don't have this interpretive nature. So for me, it was a first, and it was this process, this object-based process was really, really fun. But once the ensembles were chosen, we came up against a major challenge right away, which was how to display these things. Parachute rarely used mannequins in their store. I think this photo at right of the Miami store really shows how clothing was displayed typically, which is flat, which is 2-dimensionally. The only photo with mannequins that I found in the whole archive is the one at left here. So Nicola, do you want to maybe explain what's going on here?
Yeah. This is in the Toronto store, which was the second store that we opened after the Montreal Crescent Street store. We were still sort of trying to find our look at that point. The clothing was still very new wave looking, and we found these abandoned store mannequins and thought that they would work with the look of the store at that time. So we dressed them up in some jumpsuits and put them in the window of the store. And that was fine for that era, but then we gradually moved on to a much more architectural, simple, industrial look, and we abandoned mannequins for display purposes, and that's what you can see in the Miami store on the right. And the clothing was, as Alexis said, was much more geometrically, displayed and flat.
So this was really a team effort to figure out what are we going to do here, between us as curators and the conservation colleagues and our exhibition technicians. I think it's really important to realize how collaborative museum work is. I think it's one thing for a curator to have a really wonderful idea, but it's something completely else to realize those ideas. So I'm proud of what we achieved. At the McCord, at the museum here, we always customize our mannequins. And we realized early on that we were never going to use boutique style mannequins for this show, both for aesthetic reasons, but also budgetary reasons. There was also a lot of challenges with this clothing. So lots of pants, which requires more mannequin work, lots of very small sizes, which weren't going to fit on typical mannequins. And as we said before, this need for androgynous silhouettes. Oftentimes I find boutique mannequins can be hyper masculine, hyper feminine, and here we wanted something maybe a bit more fluid or neutral. And again, I bring it back to COVID. COVID put a wrench in this again because a lot of suppliers were closed. So even if we had wanted to order things, we just couldn't. So our conservation team here really made do with what was on site, in particular, Amelia Desjardins and Carolyn Bourgeois. There was a lot of repurposing, actually a lot taken from 𝗪𝗧𝗪. So we recovered mannequins with new fabrics for parachute that were in the 𝗪𝗧𝗪 show. We reused a lot of the wooden arms. And these two photos in the middle, I love because this just shows how resourceful people are. On top, we had these kind of partial wooden arms, and Carolyn Bourgeois, using pool noodles, crafted these almost like Frankenstein arms. So, all that the viewer sees is the wooden part, and the pool noodle is hidden inside the garment. At the bottom here, this was her solution for hands in pockets. Once you put wooden hands in the pockets, it made the garments bulge. So she made these really amazing mitten-like hands for hands in pockets. And again, another use of these pool noodles.
The result is quite amazing, I must say. It's great you have those pictures because that helps to understand all the work that goes behind to make it perfect. Also,
well, I think everybody realized while we were working on this that it was kind of atypical, right? So I know I was documenting like crazy, taking photos, and I think our technicians and our conservation team did too, because it was kind of a new avenues of display for us.
Yeah, and everybody was very enthusiastic, I must say, in every department as well, communications as well, and everybody. That's a great team at the McCord. Also, one of the aspects we know, once all the research is done, all the mannequins have been set up, you need a scenography, you need a set. And I must say, 𝗪𝗡𝗪 and his team did quite an amazing job. And to understand the brand and understand the spirit of the time, Alexis, can you tell us, maybe I could ask also Nicola her reaction. What does she feel about the scenography? But maybe Alexis, you can start with it.
Well, I can't speak for the work of others. And I think if people are interested in learning more about what 𝗪𝗡𝗪 and his team did, but also what Brian K. Lamond and Studio Principal did with the graphic design, there's a really great interview on the museum's blog with the two of them where they talk about their own interpretation of the Parachute Archive and the work that they did. I can say that I agree with you, and I know Nicola does too, that they did a really fantastic job. I think what would be great here is to maybe take this opportunity to talk about 3 spots in the exhibition from a curatorial and or conservation perspective. The first is in our second section, Collage and Hybrid. In particular, these suspended and 2-dimensionally displayed flat ensembles. These were informed from this photo of the Worcester Street store in Soho that you see at the bottom left of your screen, of how they displayed clothing there. And I was lucky enough to be able to talk to a guy named Montgomery Fraser, who had been the creative director of the Soho store. And he was the one who did these displays. So he explained to me what they did, and it was really informative. But there's a big difference between a retail display and a museum installation. First of all, a retail display in a parachute store lasted maybe a week, whereas here we're dealing with 6 months. But also here at the museum, we follow rules of conservation. So we have to treat garments differently than you do in a retail setting. So this was really a multi-step process with 3 different mountings. We had chosen 5 to display flat, 5 to display suspended. And from those 5 suspended, Nicola and I, with our conservator, 𝗪𝗓𝗧𝗛, in the photo at far left, did a really preliminary mounting just to see if this was gonna work. And right away, we identified one outfit that looked terrible from the bar. So we did a little switch. We put one hung up that was supposed to be flat and vice versa. After that, exhibition technician Patrick Mignot came behind us to further refine this mounting. So with him, he had started to create flat 2D supports to put in the pants so they would hold their shape. With Nicola and I, we evaluated these in terms of proportion, where pants should be hitting, how shirts should be positioned. And at certain moments in this process too, we added more garments in. We found we needed more layers, or we needed an accessory like a belt. And then finally, our former conservation technician, Amelia Desjardins, came last with her amazing technical know-how to further refine and finalize these silhouettes. And these are her photos at far right. She wrote a really great post for the blog on the mounting of one of these suspended items, ensembles, sorry. So I think if the conservation side of things interests you, I would say to visit the blog. A bit of the same process for the stuff that was flat on the platform. So with Patrick, we laid the clothes out on these temporary inclined platforms in the theater here at the museum. And with Nicola, we figured out if we were going to tuck shirts in, hoods up, how sleeves were going to be positioned, if we needed accessories. After that, Carolyn Bourgeois of the conservation team made these full body 2-dimensional supports to put in the garments. They're flat for the most part, except in some, the shoulder area has a bit more padding, just again, so garments wouldn't start caving in on themselves. And then finally at right, and this is a picture that I love, to prevent the garments in collage and hybrid from sliding down the platforms, she almost just traced the silhouette of these, cut them out of felt that matched the colors of the garments so that they would disappear. And this is like an underlay on all of the platforms so that nothing moves around during the 6 months that they're in the gallery space. We had flat stuff displayed in our last zone, the store experience as well. And this is a really fun photo that Patrick took from the cherry picker while we were in the installation process before the show was open. On a side note, I just want to use this photo to talk a bit about Parachute's connection to Russian Constructivism. The Russian logo is kind of a secondary logo of Parachutes, and we see it a little bit throughout the exhibition on t-shirts, on postcards, and also on duffel bags. But when we were working on these pre-mounting of the flat ensembles and interacting with the clothing, I began thinking about how similar these clothes look to the avant-garde experimental sportswear of constructivist artist Varvara Stepanova, both in terms of the graphic nature of the clothes and their linear designs. Really late in the exhibition process, Nicola shared with me several pages from memoirs that Harry had been working on before his death. And sure enough, in those pages, I found a passage where he talked about his admiration for the work of Stepanova. And for me, it was just validation. It was validation that we had made good choices in how we were displaying the clothes and interpreting them. And personally, I feel like these 2D mounts are the best in the exhibition. Very true to Parachute, I think. Another section worth noting is our section Underground Images. So Nicola already mentioned our observations about garments presented in large groups, but what worked for the mannequins also worked for the archival material. And in this zone, we presented 46 postcards all together on a wall. A secondary message that I wanted to communicate with this exhibition was that we're in a pre-internet time in Parachute's 16 years of business. So Nicola, do you want to maybe talk a bit about the importance of postcards to diffuse the brand?
Yeah. Yes, so there was no Instagram. So we basically had to be quite creative. Initially, with the first couple of stores, we depended very much on word of mouth. And then a little bit later, when we started attracting amazing photographers and models and had a series of really beautiful photographs and graphic designs, we decided to put out postcards. And so we had the salespeople in the stores were encouraged to have lists of their favorite, of the best customers, and they would send out these postcards to the customers telling them about new collections that were coming in, special events, fashion shows. And so there were always these postcards being sent around and being displayed. And also in the early days, we made flyers with photographs and graphics, and we would post those around the city as well.
Just one other thing that I feel like that's noteworthy in this gallery is the mannequins that are presented here over in the far corner. So, you know, we have the mannequins, we have the outfits, but the styling of these was directly informed by the archive, especially the tying of the belts. So the image at top center, the promotional photo, but also the technical photo at top right, which is also a picture of Nicola modeling herself. These helped us to tie the belts. The ad at the bottom center really informed our color choices for the pants. And this was also one of the few color photographs in the parachute archive. So we took advantage. But then beyond that, I think the technical documents, so the photos, and at bottom right, you have these two technical sketches, helped me so much writing labels. So from these documents, I was able to learn style names, style numbers, fabrics, and really precise collection dates. So it allowed us to write really, really precise labels throughout this show. And as a curator and fashion historian, doesn't get better than this. And you know, also the fact that this is one-stop shopping. We didn't have to go anywhere else. It was all there waiting for us in Nicola's archive. The final section, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just, for the opening, it was great to see those photographers like 𝗪𝗏𝗘𝗖, 𝗪𝗏𝗪𝗏, or even 𝗪𝗏𝗘𝗖, being very touched by the pictures when they saw them on the walls, and they felt it was paying homage to them as well. And I think it's important to comment that those Quebec photographers, because of Parachute, became known elsewhere because they were published as well in the Interview magazine, for example. And it's great that those talent could be exhibited and that we show their work as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think all photographers were so generous with us, and everybody remembered taking the photos and talked about Parachute as being an important part of their early careers as young photographers. Yeah.
Now the store experience, yes.
Yeah, so in this final section of the show, the store experience, the archival material and photography guided our object selection. So we knew we were going to have bleachers. 𝗪𝗑𝗘 and his team, you know, from day one, we're going to include this into the design. So Nicola and I selected a group of 12 mannequins to place together, all inspired by this amazing photo of Bobby Sheehan's of an event at the Soho store in 1980. I was also very taken by this photo of the Miami store at right, this pop of yellow and red color. I mean, this is, and just by chance in Nicola's archive, she had a ton of red and mustard yellow garments. So it was really by chance that we were able to do this. I think also, you know, where there's so much black and gray in this show, I think our project manager, Carolyn Truchon, had joked at one point saying, you know, an alternative name for this parachute exhibition could have been 50 Shades of Gray. But, you know, to be able to end with some drama, to end with this pop of color is great, because exhibitions obviously serve an educational purpose, but we want visitors to have an emotional experience as well. And I think these bleachers at the end is a really nice kind of finale to our show. In the same section, we have the second group of ensembles around the blue sonotubes and the flat display cases that we already discussed. But in an envelope at the bottom of an archival box, I found these 4 paint chips, and written on the envelope had been Soho store colors. So these were amazing. These are original colors from the Soho store. 𝗪𝗑𝗘𝗖 and his team obviously used these for the design, but Nicola and I used this as a color palette a little bit to inspire our choices for what is presented on the flat platforms. The mannequins represented our interpretation of what we saw in a video from the LA store, from the Hollywood store actually in spring, summer 1987. So we were able to actually identify 2 outfits that are the same thing you see in the video. So 2 of the women's ensembles here are exactly what you see. The other 3 were our interpretation of the style of clothes that was designed for this collection. So for me, this zone really represents a very successful melding of design and curatorial practice. We came at it from 2 different perspectives. But our choices were all informed by references found again in Nicola's wonderful archive.
I think it's wonderful we're able in that last room to live the real experience of the store, because the size is there, the feeling, the music, everything, the surrounding, and it's really like being in Soho. And we know with the history of Parachute how Soho was important in the image and on the development of the brand as well. And Nicola, as a fashion designer, how did you live this experience of becoming a curator?
It was the most amazing experience. And I want to say too, that the first time I walked into that space of where they were recreating the Soho store, and I walked over and I touched the blue columns, I couldn't believe them. It was very moving. It was just like being back in the 80s in Soho. But the whole experience of helping with this exhibit has been pure nostalgia and a total ego trip. But I was very happy to be able to celebrate Parachute. And I've also obviously learned a lot about, the curating and creating an exhibit. I had no idea about the research and the patience and the creativity that was needed. But it was a fantastic experience. I really, really loved it, and I learned so much.
And it's wonderful that your daughter could see, because she was very young when you had the brand, and it's wonderful she could come, and now your son will come as well. And I think for them it must be quite a strange feeling when they get into this exhibition, because it's something in their mind that is so far away as well.
Yes.
And do you have one wish, Alexis and Nicola, with this exhibition now that it's done, that it's living? I'm sure you dream of a few things now. And there's a book, which is also a great thing, a wonderful thing.
Yes, well, I'm hoping that the Parachute book will finally be launched and be available in the McCord bookstore, hopefully in March. And it'll also be available on the website and the boutique website, and also...
No, sorry, we won't be selling it on the website. It will be on Idea Books in London.
On Idea, okay. The
Here
UK
it's just on site.
Distributor, IKEA, it'll be available on their website. And also they're hoping to make to publish a more mainstream version of the book too, with wider distribution. Alexis, well, everybody is hoping that the exhibit will go on tour, that it'll be in other museums in Canada and the US, particularly LA and New York, where we had such a strong presence. I'm working on organizing a Parachute Prize to be awarded to fashion design students who best embody the Parachute philosophies and who are working on ways in which fashion is held accountable for its environmental impact in the future, which I think is really important for any designers coming along now. And that's it.
Well, I think it's wonderful. I think it's a great idea to create this prize, because we need a new generation of designers, and they need help, that's for sure. And Alexis, do you have any wish?
I think for me at this point, I'm switching focus a bit to diffuse this story on an international level. So, now that all of this research is done, now that the book is done, I want to take my research to present at some conferences and whatnot. So far this year, I'm going to present for the Costume Society of America in May, I believe. I'm going to present for the Association of Dress Historians in London in October. And I think I can get one more presentation out of this research.
Wonderful. We now have time for questions from the audience, and that's the great thing with being live. And 𝗪𝗑𝗘𝗖 has one. She says, so intriguing to learn that Parachute taped in the era of the 80s. How was it done? How can it be done even today? So there are two questions. I don't know, Nicola, if you want to start with.
Well, first of all, it's a very different world today. So I think the first thing that anyone is thinking about if they're planning to create a brand today, is a clothing brand, is sustainability, and how can we possibly clothe people without damaging the planet. We were in the 1980s, we were so totally unaware of all of that, and I feel terrible about the way that the harm that we did to the planet, but we didn't know about it in those days. So, basically, I would say, be bold, believe in yourselves, take risks, but make sure that you've done your research and that whatever you're going to do is thinking about the world around you.
We have a message from James Fowler that used to work in the Toronto Star. Do you remember him?
Yes, absolutely. I wanted to try and track him down, but I couldn't find him.
Wow, that's wonderful. He works in the 80, 81, 82. It was a nucleus of what was going on in Toronto at that time, for sure. Looking very forward to visiting the show. So great to see and hear you again, Nicola.
Oh, my best wishes to him too. That's fantastic.
So you can write to the museum to get in touch with Nicola if you want to see her.
Yeah. I'd love to see.
We have Michel Galland. So Nicola reminds us why you decided to end the adventure of Parachute. Yes, the end of the brand. That's a question that people always wonder.
Basically what happened was when we started creating Parachute, we had only intended to do it for like about 10 years. 5 or 10 years, because we didn't see ourselves being involved in fashion for the rest of our lives. So also we had leases in the stores most of them were 10 years. So by the time the first decade ended, we had to make a decision. Did we want to continue and renew these leases? Or did we want to move on to something else? And by the end of by the early 90s, it was very different in fashion. There were many, many more designers with their own stores. There was a lot more competition. We had expanded to such an extent that we had very little time to actually design for and that was the fun side for Harry and me, the designing and the creating. And we were just basically had managerial roles. And we were very bad at delegating. So we really hadn't, developed a system that would enable us to keep designing and be happy in what we were doing. So we decided just to shut everything up and move on to something else. And that's the reason that we closed it up.
Must have been a tough decision. Jonathan Walford is asking, are there any plans to relaunch some of the pieces for today or today's market?
Well, we did work on a project with the McCord on recreating some of the garments and the accessories, which are for sale in the boutique and online. And they've sold really, really well. We've actually had to reorder a lot of them. And I mean, I'm always open. I'm open to Parachute having another life and going forwards, but I don't quite know what format that would take. So there are no actual plans at the moment, no.
Lise Carbonneau is asking, do you remember at what address number was located the store on Crescent Street? I know it's Weinstein and Gavino's now in that area.
Oh, really? I don't remember the number. I remember the number, the street address. Well, you remember, right?
I don't remember it off the top of my head, but no, we did. We tried to. Actually, I think it's in our visitor's guide that we prepared for the exhibition with all of our labels. At the back, there's a page where we've listed all of the store addresses, their neighborhoods, their street addresses, and all of that.
It was something like 1458B or something. It was in the back of a courtyard. Nobody else wanted it. It was basically a furnace room. And it was in a building that a friend of Harry's was owned, and Harry was teaching at the University of Montreal, urban planning, and he had his students design a conversion for that building. And so that's how he got to know about it, and he thought it would make a good store. So.
Yeah, I remember, that's why I say it became then the Hard Rock Cafe after that. And now that space is closed, and it's the
they've closed it in. Yeah,
Weinstein and Gavino's. If people really,
but it was interesting because nobody knew it was there. There were no signs or anything, so it was very much word of mouth, and that people got to know about it.
Totally. The first time I went to the store, I thought it was a company from either Japan or LA, New York City, but not Montreal, and I was amazed to learn that. Finally, and very proud of it as well. Some people are bringing some memories as well, because some say they remember on Saint Laurent close to the business nightclub, which was a famous club at the time. Thank you so much. In French, après Parachute, Nicola a-t-elle continué à travailler de mode and on what projects? Did you work as a designer after Parachute?
No, I did a little bit of consulting. I worked with, immediately after we closed up the last Parachute store, I worked with Harry on some projects, urban planning projects and some architectural projects, which I helped with. And I had young children, so I didn't actually get back into fashion. And over the years, I've done a little bit of sort of consulting, but nothing as big a project, no projects as big as Parachute. No.
Mm-hmm. It is something you would like to do if you would relaunch some of the pieces to work on the design process as well?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if I actually, how much I would want to be back in the fashion world right now, but I would certainly like to see Parachute being taken into some capable hands and taken on in some form or other. So I'm open to anything at this point.
I think it was the last question. Yes, I think it is from what I see. So, well, I must thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking with you. I think I'm so happy that this project does exist and it has a life of its own now. It's almost the public. And I hope the people will still keep coming on. The reactions are so amazing. And the visitors, it's still the 25th of April, if I'm right, that the exhibition will be on. So thank you, Alexis. Oh, merci. Yeah. Thank you, Alexis, and thank you, Nicola. And long live Parachute and the exhibit as well.
I just wanted to thank you, Stéphane, very much. And I just wanted to thank the museum and the team for the amazing work they did and their enthusiasm. And the exhibit has been a great success. And also Alexis, who has been a great pleasure to work with. And we made a good team.
Yeah,
thank
we
you,
did. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, this is my time too to thank you all for your attention, and thank you to our guests, Nicola and Alexis, for being with us today, and thank you, Stéphane, for that great interview. Before we go, I just wanted to invite you all to this next activity we have in conjunction with Parachute. So it's Parlons-en, parlons-nous. C'est un atelier en français. Il reste quelques places, c'est le 27 février prochain, où est-ce qu'on pourra parler avec Katharina Sand de pouvoir du vêtement chez l'individu. Alors, vous êtes invités à vous inscrire via le site web du musée. L'atelier a lieu au Musée McCord. Donc, voilà, je vous remercie encore pour votre présence et à la prochaine.